Yeah. Who that is? I am healthy, I am wealthy, I am rich, I am that bitch. I am gonna go get that bag, and I am not gonna take your shit. I am protected, well respected. I'm a queen, I'm a dream. I do what I wanna do, and I'm who I wanna be, 'cause I am me.
Good day to everyone, ladies and gentlemen, and non-gender conforming individuals. Sarnay, how do you do on this lovely Tuesday? This is week 3.
I can't believe it. Like, we've been doing the darn thing.
I know. What's been your favorite so far?
Last week's episode was like, it felt real good. I think it might have been our Thursday show.
Yeah, that was one of mine
Feel
too.
good. A nice kiki, you know?
Yes. I've been thinking about our dream jobs. What if we just like move to middle of nowhere, Pennsylvania, buy a farm and a ranch, and you can open up a brand new funeral home.
Listen, I don't want to be in the middle of nowhere.
Okay, we could be off the 22 somewhere, or 22. You don't say the before your highways.
But I'm thinking I would love to be in DC and have a great funeral home.
Yeah, now that I think about it, Central PA is probably not the place. Yeah.
I need to be where the chocolate resides.
Facts. I've been watching An Unlucky Clencher Woman. It's a Black woman who bought a manor in upstate New York, and she has a Great Dane, and it's like her journey to like refurbishing this house. I'm like, that is the life I want.
Well, you're kind of sort of already on that path. You have the Great Dane.
We're not far away. In due time. Today, all this week, we have some excellent guests, tremendous guests, iconic guests. Today, the person we have is one of the first people I like even ever knew about in venture. And I've been following her. I don't know if she knows this, but for a long time. When I first met her, I was so intimidated. But I then got to see her toiletry bag, and all seriousness went out the window because it's a Ziploc bag. We'll make fun of her when she gets on. I can see her laughing backstage. And I just cannot wait to hear from her today. She is a true OG when it comes to venture. She's been in the game for a hot minute. And listen to this. So our guest is the founding partner, I won't say her name yet, and managing director of Cake Ventures, where she invests in areas where she sees the future of technology being driven by major demographic shifts. Monique is a venture capitalist who, I said her name. She's a venture capitalist who has invested in global startup ecosystems in the US and internationally since 2016. Prior to founding Cake Ventures, she was a venture partner at 500 Startups, which is now 500 Global, which I can't wait to hear more about, where she invested in early stage companies in the US and Africa. Following her time at 500 Startups, she became a venture scout at Lightspeed and a trusted advisor to foundations and venture capital firms like SoftBank, where she advised on the Vision Fund's Merge Accelerator. Before moving to the investor side of the table, she spent 15 years in the startup industry as a founder and operator. Please, everyone, give a warm welcome to Monique Woodard. So happy to have you.
Hi. You came
Welcome.
for my toiletry bag right away.
Because, it's just so fascinating when you see, it's like you truly are a nerd, like a rule following nerd. It's like, wow. Just like us.
Just like us.
I don't know how it came about, but we were all going to the airport for a conference.
Yes.
And we were talking about our toiletry bags, and Monique pulls out a Ziploc bag.
As you do. I mean, it's the airport. You put your stuff in a Ziploc bag. And then Mandy told me that I didn't have to do that anymore.
Very old school.
But I love the throw.
But I
Do you
swear the
still
last time I was in Europe, they, forced me into a Ziploc bag. So
do you still use the Ziploc bag method?
I have a clear case. So yes, I
Upgrade.
have upgraded. I've upgraded.
Does it have a zipper
Yeah.
on it? Or
It
does
does
it
have a
Ziploc?
zipper.
Oh
It
shoot.
has a zipper.
Monique, I'm so glad you're here. And the way
Yeah,
that
thank
I
you.
believe Monique came onto the show, I saw her walking down the stairs here at this club that shall not be named. And I was like,
Yeah.
another Black person? I was like, is that
Yeah.
we had a moment, and the third Black person who was in the building happened to be Monique's friend. And I was like, this was meant.
Yeah,
This was meant to be.
meant to be. It was meant
Yes.
to
So
be.
thank you so much for coming on.
Yes, you're welcome. I love being here. Thank you.
Good. So we ask everyone when they come on the show to tell us about your money story and the money and wealth narrative that you grew up with, that you feel like you are either unlearning in your career or that you're carrying with you throughout the remainder of your life.
Yeah. So I grew up in a really small rural town in Florida, and my grandfather was a farmer, and my dad worked fire and rescue at NASA, and my mom worked for the phone company. And so we were a very, rural, working class family. But my grandfather had a lot of land that he has then passed down to us. And so we had more land than the average family. And that was definitely the center of our wealth, so to speak, and our family wealth. And so that has stayed in the family, thankfully, for the most part. And, the area where I grew up, I sort of grew up on my entire family on one long street because we own the land of that street. And across the street were these big, now multi-million-dollar horse farms. And we own the land across the street.
Wow.
And that has definitely impacted the way I think about money and wealth and property and ownership and all of those things. And, my grandparents and my parents also were very much independent. My dad, even though he worked for NASA, he would come home and he would work at this fish market that he owned. So he was also a small business owner. And after school, I would go and do my homework at the fish market and work the register. And yeah. And so, I got to see a lot of small business ownership right up close.
Wow. So how do you feel like or let me ask this, when did you realize that was potentially unique to you and not something that all of your friends had?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of my friends and people I went to school with, middle school, high school, a lot of them had families who ran farms, right? And so that was not uncommon, but I will say, I had cousins who lived in town and they had very different lives than what I had, right? And so I was able to see that there was a very stark difference there of how they thought about the way that their life could go and the heights that their life could take. And my family always told me that I could be anything I wanted to be. Maybe that was a mistake.
Nah.
Here we are. And,
Yeah. Thanks for sharing all that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you've been in the venture game for a minute. And so how do you feel like your that upbringing influenced what you ended up doing for work?
Yeah, I mean, I've always wanted to be, I've always been entrepreneurial. So I've never been a person who was going to work for a company for, 20 or 30 years and then retire with that company. I knew that was never going to be my path. And so I designed my life to be that. And, I didn't know what a venture capitalist was when I was in high school, college, even after college. I didn't know what a venture capitalist was until I moved to San Francisco in 2008.
Mm.
But I knew what I knew was, I said one day, I want to help entrepreneurs grow. And I didn't know what that actually meant, right? And then I moved to San Francisco, and then there just became this like language and an ecosystem around that kind of nugget of a thought. And then I was able to start, pulling on the different threads as a founder, starting a community of founders called Black Founders,
Mhm.
And then moving on to the investor side of the table, and then starting my own venture firm. Like once I got here and like really kind of understood the playbook, I was able to accelerate into, what it has become now.
Mhm. And what brought you to the Bay? Was it the work you were doing for the government, or was it something else?
I moved here. A friend of a friend said, I have this company, and it's a small company, and they're looking for someone to work on product.
Mm.
And I came out for 36 hours, and I didn't know anyone in San Francisco. And I was like, I'm going to move here. And I moved 30 days later, and I've been here ever since.
Wow. I find your journey, it's just, like I said, there's so much I want to ask about because it is so powerful. And when you did get here, you were doing work for the mayor's office, right? In your first,
I
the early
was
part
a
of the year?
fellow in the mayor's office of civic innovation, and I worked on access to broadband and bridging the gap between tech companies and government, and worked on delivering access to broadband for like the most disconnected parts of the city, which are Chinatown and Bayview,
Mhm.
and figuring out if we could do that, how we could do that, and figuring out like the very political things around giving people free access to the internet.
Yes, indeed. Yes.
Mhm.
Yeah. And I was going to ask you earlier about like you're getting into venture. You were talking about like learning the playbook here. What do you think it is about, for those who don't live here, what do you think it is about this area that is unique for entrepreneurs and founders enough that you are able to learn enough that you did to start your own fund?
Yeah, I think there's, I think a lot of it is the idea of like serendipity
Mm.
and, encountering people and giving in a way that you don't necessarily know what the get back is going to be, right? Or if there is an immediate get, you just give, and the universe will figure it out. And then the serendipity of like being able to run into people that you see on the news or see online or see wherever, and be able to actually like have a conversation and often a relationship with those people. I think San Francisco and Silicon Valley as a whole is very good about rewarding ambition and rewarding, if you wrote to 20 of the top venture capitalists and said, I'm really interested in venture, I guarantee like you would get responses from about 50% or more of them if you have the right words in the email. If you are presenting yourself well, you will get responses from them.
And do you feel like, and I ask this because I've been reading this book called Selfie by William Storr about our individualism, our narcissism essentially, and how California is like the prime example of what it means to like lead an individualist life, and to the extent that our religion is work. Our religion is that. Yeah. Do you feel like that it was part of your journey of like the unabashed audacity? In other meaning, like if you were in Florida still, do you feel like you could have done the same thing the way you did here?
Oh, absolutely not. Absolutely not. I think the doors were there were no doors to knock on, right? And so I had to put myself in a place where there were doors to knock on, and where there were the right people to open those doors, and where my ambition could flourish. And so I do think, if you want to be a movie star, you go to Hollywood, you go to LA, right? If you want to be in private equity, you should probably go to New York or London. If you want to be in venture capital in, tech, you should probably move to San Francisco. That's not to say that you can't do a lot of these things in other places, but I think that it accelerates what you're doing so drastically that it behooves you to at least spend some time there, right? You can, of course, start a fund in just about any place these days. But I think that if you want to put like gasoline on a fire, you should at least spend some time in the Bay Area to really do that.
Yeah, I agree. It is pretty wild. I'm gonna switch topics, but before I do that, Sharnae, do you want to ask a question before I pivot?
Yeah, it's just hearing about what you were just saying about, I couldn't do this in Florida, and I needed to move for that acceleration. It makes me think about a conversation that I had with a founder this past year around proximity versus access, and how like critical that component is. And I'm someone that truly values place and, building ecosystems in place so that, people who may not have the ability in this moment in time to like move off to Hollywood to be an actress or an actor, but how can they find community and proximity and all of the things in their locale? And so I would love to kind of hear your point of view around, maybe like for that person that in this point in time, maybe they're not able to go to San Francisco for that gasoline, but like how can folks create that sense of acceleration and gasolina in their spot and in their place? And again, like I definitely wholeheartedly agree with you. Like for me, moving and living in other places and spaces and time has been critical to my growth. And I've returned home, but I'm not the same. And it's only helped me because I've lived other places. But like, how can a founder who's building or, a future investor who wants to put something together, how can they figure it out?
So I think social media has become the great equalizer for a lot of this. I have certainly seen people building audiences on TikTok, on X/Twitter, on Instagram, and you can do that from just about anywhere. So being able to like be very visible and talk about the thing that you're interested in, whether it's a startup or whether it's AI or venture capital or whatever. I think like having a presence and an audience on social media is really one of the equalizers. I think another big equalizer, I always tell people every great thing that I've gotten is because I've been like a prolific writer in the past and in the current moment. And so I write about, I remember that I wrote about this sort of demographic change idea, which then became like the underlying thesis for my fund. And it was like the very beginning nuggets of it. And Jeremy Liu at Lightspeed, who is, he was the first investor in Snapchat, Affirm, all of these companies. He reached out to me and he was like, hey, I read your thing. I would love to chat. And so we had coffee and we started a friendship. And when I was leaving my job at 500 Startups, which was my first job in venture, he was like, well, what are you going to do next? And I was like, I don't know. And he was like, well, why don't you scout at Lightspeed while you figure out your life? And that was great, right? And so I say every great thing that has ever happened to me has happened because I was like prolifically writing about things that I was thinking about. And so this sort of like writing, online presence, building an audience, whether that's via written word or video or whatever, like that has real weight to it. And I think that no matter where you are, you can do that.
Love that.
There's so many things you said, Monique, I want to point out. One, if y'all don't know Monique, she's not the kind of person who's going to run on stage, grab a mic, and say what she has to say. That's not her style. And what I think is so beautiful about what you just said and so genius is that putting yourself out there in a way that works for you matters. And putting yourself out there and creating a brand for yourself matters. And also that you don't necessarily have to know what you're going to do next, but when you, you know, use your arm as a straw, as I heard last night, or both your hands just to express the word, you never know who's going to reach out to you or never know who's going to see the genius in you. And Monique, a lot of our audience are people who are in potentially corporate roles. They're pivoting. They maybe are thinking about becoming entrepreneurs, but in general, they're thinking about how to expand their wealth. And your path was through venture. And I'm curious to know, like, when you were raising your first fund, and I hear this from a lot of fund managers, you're doing a lot of educating for potentially first-time LPs because we all ideally want people who look like us investing in our funds. So tell us more, and this is kind of a leading question, but tell us more about like what those conversations were like for you, and were people trusting of you, or did it feel like you were talking to a wall? Like what? Tell us more.
Yeah, so when you go out and raise a venture capital fund, you typically raise it from individual investors, so accredited investors, friends and not friends and family, but family offices, endowments, sort of institutional, what we call LPs or limited partners. And so there is a world of people who invest in venture funds. That world is not traditionally does not look like us, right? There are not that many Black professionals or people who could be investing in venture capital funds who actually have access to venture capital funds to invest in, right? I mean, it's really difficult to like get access and know where to go. And so when I started my first fund, my first fund was institutional from the very beginning. So I had access to fund of funds and, Bank of America and lots of, institutions who would invest in my first fund. But I also wanted to have individual investors around the table and provide access to people who I had known for a long time or people who knew me. And so I went to people I had worked with and, I went to other people in the industry and, I really was intentional about inviting in women and people of color broadly, but especially Black people, and really wanted to give them access to an asset class that they might not otherwise have access to. Yeah.
And how do you feel over the last 10 years since you've been doing this that eyes have opened or opinions have changed?
I think there's more visibility around venture capital, for good and for bad, because now people think that venture capital is the way that you fund any kind of business. And it's actually it should be used very narrowly. But I think that there's a lot more interest around venture capital. People understand it, I think, a little bit more than they did, 10 or 15 years ago. But I still think venture capital has an access problem. Right, where only a handful of people get access to these funds or get access to OpenAI pre-IPO or Anthropic pre-IPO or SpaceX pre-IPO, and everyone else is just sort of left with the scraps. And I would love to see that change. I would love to see a more democratization of access to private markets for women, for people of color, for all of these people who, could really have, life-changing wealth happen to them.
Yeah. I have two questions coming off of that. One, I maybe forgot the first one. In 2020, when the accredited investor laws changed, do you feel like that had a huge shift on people investing?
I don't know that it had such a big shift as we thought. I still think, because I think the education and the access did not catch up. So I think that there was a component of like, you know, even now people who are eligible to invest in venture funds, they don't necessarily know anyone who's starting a venture fund. They don't have access to the best venture funds, or, you know, the funds that are hopefully going to deliver a good return. And, you know, so and they just don't know how this fund performs and how long it takes for a fund to perform, and what that cycle is actually like. So I think there's a mixture of like education and access that is still missing.
Amen to that. Amen. I'm going to take a breath for a second. Do you have any questions, Sharnae?
Yeah, I mean, I would love to go back to the conversation around, again, access. And you mentioned the word scraps, right? Like people are left with scraps. And I'm wondering, from your point of view as an investor in it, and you've been in the game for a very long time, is that a policy issue? Is it straight up like a gatekeeping issue? Or, you know, just from sitting inside of it, and I'm sure you have comrades in the work with you, like, how are you kind of being a part of that change? Or like, how can we be a part of the change that we want to see?
Yeah. Well, I mean, you know, first, the public markets aren't necessarily scraps, right? Yeah, I still invest in the public markets just like everybody else, but I will get most of my wealth from the private markets. And you know, the fact that I have access to that and other people do not have easy access to that is pretty significant. And so I think one, talking to as many people as we can about what it means to invest in a venture fund or invest in private market companies, and, you know, and to really give them both the access, but also the real of like, you could lose all of your money, right? And that is why you try to have a diversified portfolio. I was talking to a friend just the other day about, you know, I realized that I was heavily weighted to the private markets, obviously, because I run a venture fund, and that is like where the most of my money is. And so needing to like diversify into real estate and public equities and all of these other areas, right? And so venture capital could be, and for some people should be, another asset class that they have access to and that they're able to invest in. But it's also really difficult to identify people who could and have interest in investing in venture capital funds, especially when you have, you know, I have institutional investors. In a lot of ways, institutional investors are a little bit easier because they don't require so much education, and they're easier to deal with in a lot of ways. But it is actually worth the time, in my opinion, to work with individual investors and explain to them like what venture capital is, what are the great parts of the asset class, how it works, how long it will take, that it's not just something you put your money in, you know, tomorrow and then you're liquid in 2 years. That's not the way it works. But it's worth that time to like educate people, to me, because I really do want to see more people have access. And I also want to see, you know, more people having these kinds of like incredible wealth creating moments like the investors who invested in SpaceX have had.
Absolutely. I think, Mandy, that's a great segue into the work that you're doing at Sanctum.
Listen.
I know that's a big part of, you know, your why, and just like
Yes.
making sure people have not just access, but the education needed. And it's good to know like a perspective from an investor's point of view of like, you know, dealing with individual investors requires a bit more of like a high touch experience.
Yeah.
And as an ecosystem builder, you know, that's one of the things that we're trying to do. So we can work together hand in hand.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And Charney stole the segue from me on that one, because you
Sorry.
definitely did it for us, Monique. And it makes me think of, you know, it brings me back to your story, your wealth story, and how your wealth came from land ownership, and how after emancipation we were meant to be given land, and that was not the case. And a lot of that is where the wealth gap lies,
Yeah.
really truly is. And since 2019, the wealth of Black and Brown people has increased by quite a bit, and most of that wealth has indeed come from real estate. But yet it's still very far off. So I want to hear from you, and I also want to kind of pivot into your fund and the work that you do, and the companies that you invest in are not necessarily like the sexy startups here in the Silicon Valley. I mean, there's certainly software, but they're for a different purpose. And I'd love to hear more about, you know, and the reason I'm asking this is because I can't tell you how many panels I've been on where people are talking about venture and want to do all the sexy things. I'm like, but when we invest, it's a little bit different, like inherently different, and the way we go about it is different. So yeah, please tell us more about what you do invest in, Monique.
Yeah, so I definitely invest in software companies, technology companies. Today, a lot of that is AI. But when I decided to start Cake Ventures, I sort of looked back at my track record in investing and what I had been investing in, and like what I was trying to say with these investments. So I was an early investor in Blavity / Afrotech. I was an early investor in a company called Silvernest in the aging space. I was an early investor in Minted Cosmetics, which is a beauty brand for women of color.
Still got some blush.
I kind of like
today.
Me too. Got a lot of Minted Cosmetics in my bag. And so I look back at sort of all of these investments, and I was like, okay, well, what are these investments trying to say? And I realized that I had always been investing at the intersection of technology and major demographic changes. And to me, demographic changes are big TAM expansion events. They increase the total addressable market. And so you have things like the fact that our population is aging very rapidly, not just in the United States, but globally. But in the US, the number of people over the age of 50 outpaced the number of children under the age of 15 starting in 2025. So last year was the first year that it kind of tipped that we have more older people in this country than we have younger people in this country. And that's a major, I mean, it changes everything from like caregiving to it puts additional strain on the healthcare system, which is already fragile. You know, and people will need different types of things as they get older. And, you know, the older people of today are going to expect technology to rise up to meet them because technology has been there already for a very significant part of their lives. So, you know, also one of the other demographic changes that I focus on is fertility. You know, most of the world is in pretty significant fertility decline, where people are not meeting the population replacement rates. And so like aging and fertility decline kind of go hand in hand, right? You have fewer babies and you have a lot more older people. And so those things are combining. There's also, you know, we're on the cusp of a major wealth transfer. So more money moving into the hands of women, younger, you know, Gen Z consumers, consumers of color. Like this big wealth transfer is going to change who has money. And so that is creating a rising tide of super consumers. AI has also created this change in what work means, and has accelerated a lot of categories, but will also, significantly reduce the number of jobs in other categories. So I investing in a category called what I call deskless work. So work that happens outside of an office environment, outside of like your traditional white collar office work. So like healthcare jobs, manufacturing jobs, infrastructure jobs, things like that, things that are not easily replaced by AI. So
Saying
that
it
became
again,
the
those
underlying
are not.
thesis for Cake.
Yeah. But
And
yeah.
it's called Cake because it's, I believe that each one of these is like a layer cake, of things that demographic changes that are happening. And, we should be investing in that layer cake of demographic change.
Yeah. And I've loved hearing all the content you've created around deskless work. And that a lot of that can be assumed that it actually could be done by robots. And
Yeah.
so tell us more about like the deskless workers and why they're so important to, I mean, I think some of us know the answer, but from you, what is so important about deskless workers and investing in their care?
Well, deskless work is, often part of like, what we call the real economy, I guess we're calling it these days. So think about the ways that AI has changed the way that you interact with your doctor, right? Your doctor is probably not sitting there like handwriting notes anymore. They're probably using something called a bridge to like, capture in an ambient way the notes that they need to take. And so that's the power of AI to like change the way that you interact with, a caregiver, a doctor, or a nurse. I really do think that like there is an opportunity for like robots in healthcare. I'm really kind of obsessed with that right now, because we do have a caregiver shortage. We do not have enough human caregivers to take care of the number of people that we need to take care of. And if, a robotic caregiver can, deliver medication and make sure you've taken your meds, or help with, um, making sure your grandfather or your dad turns in the bed so that he doesn't get bed sores, or can have a chat with them and measure their cognitive, where they are cognitively, and measure that and have that data over time, so that you can say, oh, my mom is actually declining cognitively, and I can tell because the caregiver robot gave me this report. Like, I think we should look at these opportunities as opportunities, like, to not replace but supplement the care that we're already trying so desperately to give to our loved ones. And so I think the era of caregiving robots is definitely here. I have a lot of questions about like, who's going to win between America and China. Like, that's a huge question mark still. But I do believe that like caregiving robots is something that we should be really thinking about. Really, really difficult. It's like being able to like use a robot for like this really difficult thing, and you be able to use it for something that's really difficult, really good.
Yeah.
Care has really been like top of mind for me over the last couple of months. A lot of people know I just love my granny, my bestie. She's like a
Yeah.
LinkedIn grandmother. But from posting a, a sentimental story about my grandmother on LinkedIn, it kind of spiraled into a conversation around the care economy. And recently, I know like Pivotal Ventures and I think the holding company, they just released a report about how much the care economy is exploding right now.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know the exact figures. I think it's over like 640 something billion dollars. in the care economy, and they talked about how there's like a 45% increase in VC investment in the space. So I don't know if that's all going all in on care robots. But what I do know is that it's an opportunity for founders and innovators to kind of like get into a space that's much needed. And I don't know if, I mean, it is blowing up, but I just now started hearing more and more about like care economy, but I've been paying attention to it because I am helping my family navigate care for my loved ones.
Yeah.
And, I'm at that age now where that's top of mind. So it's really interesting to hear that that's a space that you play in, but also like how forward thinking you are around, care and what would that look like for, everyday families who are navigating caring for their loved ones, wanting them to be home with them in a familiar space versus in a facility. Um, and how does technology play a role in that? So
Yeah.
it's an interesting
Yeah.
space.
I mean, the care economy is bigger than we even expect, bigger than we've even measured. I think even Pivotal would say that $600 billion number is probably conservative. Full disclosure, Pivotal is one of my investors. So I think that there's even more opportunity. And, I think care robots is just one aspect of it. It's also how do you equip your parents' home so that they can stay in it for as long as possible, and be able to age in place safely. How do you help them navigate, changing insurance and their finances and all of these things that evolve as they get older. So I'm really very bullish on care in general and how we can use technology for improved caregiving and improved, later stage life.
Yeah. And I think about this all the time. And a lot of the funds I work with are also invested in care and women's health. And do you think that that is like a response to the lack of what's happened, or lack of care, or lack of infrastructure within the healthcare system itself and the government? Or do you feel like it's something that we've naturally evolved into?
I mean, I definitely think the American healthcare system leaves a lot to be desired,
Indeed.
right? And is fundamentally broken in a lot of ways. And I think one of the things that we're seeing is that the end user, consumers, are more willing to take their own healthcare into their own hands, right? And so this sort of patient-led, patient-driven healthcare, so healthcare that happens outside of like just going to your primary care physician or going here or going there. A lot of that is like what I would call longevity care. But I think that's an even bigger area of interest in a market, because consumers realize that like the healthcare system is not built to support them.
No,
and
I'm one of those people.
they have to take it, they have to take their own care into their own hands, whether it's like, getting a nutritionist through one of my investments, Kulina Health, or, downloading another portfolio company called Death Clock and measuring like your death date based on your activities and your habits, or, going to a doctor that uses fertility services like Frame Fertility, another portfolio company. Like, people have started to stitch together ways to get to the things that they need that circumvent the healthcare system in a lot of ways, or use the healthcare system in ways that make sense for them, but also supplement it with other things that make sense for them.
We're gonna ask something, Charnay?
No, just
okay, cool.
I'm like, hey, we are taking matters into our own hands, and finding solutions. So I love that.
Facts. I could go one of two directions. One, either talking about like what advice you have for folks who are pivoting in their careers, or I could still talk about the healthcare system all day. But let's, for the sake of the audience, let's talk about transition. So, going back to your conversation and your time as a scout at Lightspeed, and also, by the way, you're a Black woman. In 2016, there were not the 38 Black women there are now who have venture funds. Is it I think we're maybe at 40.
30. That's great.
30.
I had no idea.
Last time I counted, it was 38.
Okay.
And like, yes, Monique, you're a Black woman. You're one of the first Black women to raise a venture fund. It took you almost 4 years, I think, to raise the first one. There were lots of times where you could have been like, you know what? I don't know if this is worth my time. So two things, like, one, what made you decide to start a fund? And did you have mentors, and or like in those moments of like, I don't know, like what were the things that kept you going?
Yeah. So it took me, let's see, I started fundraising in 2020. Is that right? Well, end of 2019 is when I decided that I think I'm going to raise a fund. And then 2020 rolled, I was fundraising, and then 2020 rolled around. I literally was having meetings as the city was shutting down for COVID. And then I did my final close on the fund. I closed $17 million by 22. And so it took a while, but a lot of that was like, you know, a weird time period, a weird time period. And sorry, I forgot the question.
Both the what made you decide to do it, and then during those times, those I don't know times.
Yeah. So I decided to do it because I felt like it needed to be done. I definitely could have joined another firm and, you know, had a very healthy, lovely salary and, you know, made millions of dollars and whatever. But I really I'm very ambitious, and I knew that like there wasn't anyone doing this type of investing yet in the way that I was going to do it. And I felt that that was a really good place to build a firm from, not just start a fund, you know, not just one fund, but to like build a long lasting firm. And so that was the reason. That was my why. And I mean, there were some really hard times. I don't know if you know this, but I'm happy to tell you all here. 5 days after the first close of my first fund, so March of 2021, I was diagnosed with breast cancer. And so I went through chemotherapy and radiation and surgery and all of those things as I was still raising this fund. And that was like the hardest thing to do, the hardest thing of my life. Like I was already doing the hardest thing of my life, which was raising a venture capital fund, and then to layer on another hard thing. And so, you know, you just put your head down and you do the thing that you have to do. And I don't know what kept me going is that every day you just have to wake up and fight for it.
Wow. Speaking of fighting, you have a birthday either coming up soon or has passed recently. It's on the 30th, 31st?
Yes, it's on the 30th.
She's
July
a Leo.
30th.
She's a Leo. Babies, so is love backstage. Yeah.
Leo gang.
What's that?
Leo gang.
Oh, yes. And I love hanging around venture capital fund managers because I think y'all are batshit wild. Like sometimes I think I'm insane, but then I meet a fund manager, I'm like, y'all don't be eating for a few months, you know. And you said something really poignant earlier, is like, I could have gone to a firm and made $1 million. And I want to be clear that if you're a Black woman raising a fund, it doesn't mean you're going to get rich fast, or if you're raising a venture capital fund in general. So tell us more about like that, being in an environment where you are a Black woman and there's this vision of what a venture capitalist should look like, what kind of assets they should have, what kind of wealth they should have, and how that either helped or hindered you in your fundraising process.
Yeah, I mean, being a Black woman raising a venture capital fund, it's like you are both there's like the hyper visibility of it, but also the invisibility of it, right?
Yep.
A friend just recently wrote a Substack about like the rooms that you're not always invited in, which I thought was like brilliant. Like you're not always invited to the same parties or the same dinners or the same this or that. And so I've done a lot to fight to be in the rooms that I feel that I need to be in for the sake of, you know, my fund, my portfolio companies, for all of those things. Yeah, it's a really interesting seat to be in. I'll give you like a very tangible example. So when you start a venture fund, you have to put in what's called your GP commit.
Mhm.
Your GP commit is at minimum about 1% of the fund, or, you know, or more. At minimum, it should be 1%. And so there's always a lot of conversation around, and you have to do it for every single fund that you raise. So, you know, you raise, you know, one fund, and then 3 years later you raise another fund, you are still obligated to the GP commit for each of those funds. And so, you know, there's always a lot of conversation around how much should my GP commit be if I don't have the same wealth that another person who, like, maybe they were at Andreessen Horowitz, or maybe they spun out of like a big firm where they had a big salary. You know, there's always a lot of conversation around how much should your GP commit be, and how do you continue to show that you have skin in the game.
Mhm.
So all of my wealth is in this fund. And look, let's not cry for me. I do okay.
Yeah. Yep.
I've been able to upgrade from a Ziploc plastic bag. I'm doing all right.
Yes, indeed. Yeah.
But it's a really, you know, it is a conversation. It is a thing that we think about when, you know, we know that Black women don't have as much wealth as like a white man who is starting a fund.
Yeah. And the management fee for a $17 million fund is, if I'm right,
$170,000.
Right. And you're expected to live off of
And
that.
then,
Go ahead.
oh, sorry, I thought you meant the GP commit.
But yeah,
Sorry.
go ahead. Nope. Yes.
Yes. The GP commit on a $17 billion fund is $170,000.
Yes, indeed.
The GP commit on a $35 million fund will be $350,000.
Right. And that's also the management fee, which means for those who are running a fund, the fee that you get to take on your fund or your salary is that 1% typically,
So
or 2%.
It's 2%. So it will be 2%. Let's just call it 2% for the sake of like having a round number. But
Mhm.
it's 2% of the fund total size. So it will be, what was that, $340,000.
Right.
per year.
And so living off of that for a number of years is not necessarily the same as like a garden variety venture capitalist who's raising an, you know, like you were saying, they have, you know, they went public, they have a massive amount of wealth that they can invest. And so
Mhm.
we were talking last week with Stephanie Van Putten around like how we measure wealth, how we compare ourselves to the white wealth of those with the head start. And what I have seen by admiring y'all and having the honor of being someone who gets to observe from the side and be a neutral party is the way that we have used the nonprofit vehicle to manage funds and have other streams of revenue has been absolutely genius. And I think it speaks to, you know, how we're differently motivated, how y'all are differently motivated. It's like there's more. I heard you say I started this fund because I had to. Like there was no one else who could do it but me. And I feel like that's such a common thread amongst the people in the venture line of work, because the investments that you're doing are different from what people see, and the way that you are working with them is also different. And I can't believe we only have 4 minutes left, but I'm curious from you, for anyone who's like looking for a pivot, who's interested or thinking about growing their wealth and wanting to think about, okay, but I want to do it my way. What are some things that you could impart on them when thinking about this?
Yeah, I think if you're interested in pivoting, I see a lot of people are interested in pivoting out of corporate America today and interested in maybe it's starting a startup, or even if not starting a startup per se, starting a business of their own. And I think you have to really lean into the things that you're good at. I also think that, like, I would say if you're starting a startup today, like really lean into the fact that it is easier than ever to start a technology company because there are so many different tools available to you. And you can do it with less money, fewer people. You know, AI tools have changed the game for everyone. And so if you aren't leaning into that, you should be. And if you're trying to like make your way out of corporate America and just figure out what you want to do next, I always believe in like preparing and then leaping. I left 500 startups with no plan. Like I didn't have like a new job lined up. I had savings, which was great, but I didn't have like a next thing that I was going to. But I felt that I wanted to take the leap and create the space, and that something new and good would fill into that space. And something new and good did fill into that space. I went out and scouted for Lightspeed. I worked with SoftBank, and like the opportunities came to meet me, but I had to take the initiative first because I had to like move out of the space where I was and go to the next thing. And once I created that space, you know, all of these opportunities came to me. And so I think that you have to prepare, but also be prepared to leap.
Sharnae, what you got?
I mean, Monique, that was a word. I think you're speaking to me right now. You know what I mean? So I'm ready. I'm hearing, you know, you need to prepare, take the leap, but in between that time, you need to hold space to do the thing. And so
Yeah.
I'm loving what you're preaching today.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I have a whole nother slew of questions, and we have not enough time left, and I'm so bummed. So you are raising your second fund. Tell us before we take off, how can people find out about you, learn more about your fund? If they're interested in investing, how should they reach out to you?
Yeah, you can reach out to me. My email is monique@cake.vc. I try to be pretty responsive to most emails. I'm on LinkedIn. Monique Woodard is my full name. So you can find me on LinkedIn. And yeah, please reach out.
Yeah, you are definitely in Nob Hill. I can hear the cathedral bells.
Now you know exactly where I am.
I do. I'm not going to say the streets though, just for, you know, but I can probably see where I am.
Exactly. Yeah, you can.
Yeah. Monique, this was such a pleasure. Do you have any like last words that are like at the tip of your tongue that you want to share with the ReWealth and Sanctum audience? And Monique was also one of the first Sanctum members. Here.
You know, we are our own wealth in a lot of ways. And so as we are creating wealth, I think it's, you know, we really have to understand that we are the wealth that we have already had. Like we are each other's wealth. We are each other's prosperity. And so how do we align together and increase that times 10?
Amen to that.
I feel like there should be some snaps going on or something.
well-played producer.
So good.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming on, Monique. This has been an
Thank you.
absolute pleasure. What a great way to start the week. We will see you. I don't know if you're gonna be on the vineyard, but I'm sure I will see you around this
I will
street.
be in Tanzania, but
So much better
enjoy
than
the vineyard.
Very nice.
Yeah.
Listen, well, enjoy yourself.
Yeah.
Can't wait to see pictures.
Thank
we will
you.
hopefully see you soon. Thank you so much again.
All right.
Bye.
Talk to you all soon.
Bye, buddy.
Bye.